Hey guys, Mono here with another commander guide. This is the third commander guide I've done, and I'm gonna pack everything from the previous videos into this one, so at least for now, this is going to be the definitive commander guide for the channel. Hopefully, this will help a lot of new players that I see taking up the commander role, being level 15 or 20. I don't think anyone with a rank as low as that should be playing commander because you will be lacking a whole lot of map knowledge that's really necessary to fulfill this role. But if you insist on doing so, well, hopefully you at least follow the advice given in this video. Also, keep in mind that, things change as the game gets updated and all that, so this might not be entirely relevant like a year from now or whatever. Check out the channel for a more updated video. If there's no updated video, then that means the information here is pretty still relevant. So yeah. All right, I'm going to first go over the commander abilities and then talk about how to win games and how to lose games, talking specifically about garrison placement and overcommitting to your attacks as a way of losing. I have made plenty of advanced tactics guides, which you should definitely check out since those are particularly relevant to the commander, but including those concepts into this video would just make it over like an hour long or something, so I'm not gonna do that. Alright, before I get started on abilities, let's talk about the general role of the commander, and that is to ensure your team achieves map control through the use of garrisons. Map control is the key to victory in Hell Loose, so your job as commander is not to lead your team into battle or anything heroic like that. There's a portion of the player base that thinks it's really cool for the commander to be rushing the enemy strong point, but you don't have access to an OP to get fast redeploys, and you don't have a squad supporting you, so you make a pretty shitty frontline soldier. What you do have access to is unique support abilities to allow you to help the team control the map through garrison placement. You basically need to look at the map, figure out which sectors you want your team to be able to be in, and place the garrisons there so they will naturally end up spawning there and therefore controlling those areas. Alright. Now let's go over every commander ability and explain their use cases. I will assume that you know what nodes are and how garrisons work and all of that, which if you don't, then please don't play commander and go check out the beginner's guide instead. No team should have to suffer an ignorant commander because you want to go through some hands-on learning process. I've seen people with 250 hours not know that you can capture a point from outside the black circle, so please don't assume that you know things without actually taking the trouble to learning, the game and all of that. All right. Let's start off with the Airhead. Airheads can be a very useful tool, but I tend to use them very sparingly for two reasons. One is that if you spam them, then the enemy will become more and more wary of them, making them more difficult to deploy without them getting intercepted. The other is that they can cause your team to overcommit to a weak attack that doesn't really have any way to sustain itself, and you can end up losing on defense without having gained much of an offensive advantage. So I use them to either create a new front to support an ongoing attack or to completely teleport my entire team into a very good position behind enemy lines. So some basic points here on what not to do is basically don't drop it near the enemy strong point unless you plan to drop a bombing run right before it. And don't drop it if you're already losing a point as a defensive measure, because the Airhead will get destroyed if the sector flips. So unless you're dropping the Airhead right as the enemy starts putting cap pressure in, it's going to be too late, and by the time it lands, you will get like maybe a spawn wave in, probably no spawn wave at all, and you will have lost your Airhead and it will be on cooldown again. Airheads are a great way for the team to overcommit and get caught outside any relevant sectors, but I will talk a bit more about this later after going over the skills. The next abilities are very simple. Dismantle will trade your manpower for being able to quickly take down a garrison. Ideally, you don't want to use this ever because you can redeploy to a garrison and take it down by hand without the resource cost. So you should keep an eye on how many garrisons you have at any given moment and just dismantle the ones that you don't need by hand before you actually need to place more garrisons. If you really need to use the dismantle ability because like a squad is in a really good position and you can place a garrison there or something, then obviously do use it, but just don't base your garrison dismantling thing around this ability. Reinforce will double the cap weight for everyone inside the strong point, so, you know, inside the black circle area, and you basically want to use this to withstand an attack once the cap starts going to the enemy team, but only if you have a way for players to actually reach the circle without dying. If they can't reach the circle without dying, then save it for another moment. Encouraged will increase your resource generation by 50% for 5 minutes for all your resources, and you should always spam this if you are at max nodes. You will lose 250 manpower by doing this because Encouraged costs 400 manpower, but you gain 150 fuel and munitions from it, so it's a net win overall. Encouraged is a great way to offset the cost of running, for example, multiple artillery guns. Supply drops are one of your main tools at garrison building, with the second being the supply trucks and the third being just other squads and squad leaders. Supply drops are very easy to spot, and the enemy will try and intercept them and destroy them, so you need to either use them early or pretty much use them just all over the map. Basically, if you just drop them at every single good possible location for a garrison and alternate where you're dropping the supplies, so drop one north, drop one way to the south, then maybe drop one way behind enemy lines, then drop one near your defensive HQ, and stuff like that. Basically, if you just drop them very far away from each other, you will guarantee that some will make it to the ground and remain there. If there's a recon squad taking out the supplies that you're dropping for defensive garrisons, then use those supply drops somewhere else for a while and then try again, or just use a different strategy, like using a half-track instead of a supply truck, for example, to just drop a quote-unquote garrison using the half-track. Try to never drop supplies unexpectedly on a squad that's behind enemy lines, because that's just going to give away their position to the enemy team. It is better for the squad to do a double drop. That's way more stealthy. You know, you do a double drop, you alternate your support players, you get 100 supplies, you get a red zone garrison without having to use the airdrop supplies. All right. The Recon Plane is fairly simple. It just gives you a narrow band across the map that will mark enemy players and vehicles. It won't mark enemy recon players, so keep that in mind. And there's different uses for this depending on the situation. You could run it parallel to the front line, marked on the map to spot clusters of enemy, which should show the location of enemy garrisons. So if you see a cluster of like 6-7 enemies, that's probably an enemy garrison location. And you can then use that to inform where you're going to drop your bombing runs. However, in and of itself, the Recon Plane doesn't really do much on its own. It needs to be combined with some form of attack, like artillery or a bombing run or a push from your infantry or something, you know, to basically use that information in your favor. So even though it has a short 5-minute cooldown, I wouldn't recommend spamming it over and over again unless the information is actually helping things get done, right? If it's just helping the infantry get some more extra kills, then it's not really worth it. The Strafing Run is one of the more niche tools that the commander has, so you basically want to use this to quickly kill off an enemy that is dismantling one of your garrisons. So when you have a garrison light up red, you drop a Strafing Run on it, kill the enemy, and clear the garrison so people can spawn. This won't really work on frontline garrisons because the time to dismantle is very short, but it is extremely effective for garrisons that are past the first 2 sectors. Chances are that the garrison will eventually get taken down because it's already been spotted. So, you know, that's going to happen, but keeping the garrison alive for longer by using the Strafing Run is always good. I don't think the Strafing Run should be used for anything else, to be honest. As a way to get kills, for example, by strafing a road or a trench, it is extremely expensive versus using artillery or anything else really. You're better off using the munitions for firing an AT gun or pretty much anything else. So unless you have no artillery on the map at all, only use it for clearing out red garrisons. If you use it for something else, chances are when you need it to clear a garrison, it's gonna be on cooldown and you're gonna lose that garrison. All right, bombing runs are of course a really devastating attack that can initiate a capture or defend against one. Since this game is all about outspawning your enemies, being able to take down enemy garrisons using the bombing run is ideal. So I try and wait until the garrison's been spotted or until I have a really good idea of where it might be by using the Recon Plane, for example, and then use my bombing run. If you don't take out the enemy garrison with the bombing run, you're only going to win a very small window of opportunity before everyone killed by it redeploys at a nearby spawn point. So make sure your team is ready to get into the cap area after the bombing run. One of the best ways to tell if your commander is incompetent is if he drops a bombing run that's completely out of context with what's going on with your team's position on the map. As I mentioned before, the Airhead bombing run combo can be very effective when done right. You basically drop a very aggressive Airhead right on the point, followed by a bombing run on top of the Airhead, roughly 20 seconds or 30 seconds after clicking the Airhead on the map. The bombing run will land just before the Airhead lands, clearing out the area and allowing the team to spawn in. After this, we get into the vehicle spawning thing, which I'm not going to go over because it's as simple as just spawn the vehicles that the people need when they need them. Don't give a heavy tank to a one-man tanking squad or anything like that. But apart from that, it's fairly simple. If you have a surplus of fuel, you can start spawning Halftracks to supplement your garrisons. Halftracks are a great backline garrison because they can't be dismantled by the Recon players, and even though they can call in artillery on them, for example, to take them out, only a direct hit will take them out, and that is something that is very, very hard to achieve. So I tend to use the Halftracks to fill in the gaps between my garrisons, basically as a way to increase spawn density without needing to abide by the 200-meter separation rule for garrisons. They can also be quite effective as an attack spawn point if you can safely drive your way close to the enemy sector. They are quite expensive for what they are, and at 60 seconds per spawn wave, they should never ever be your only way to spawn in a specific area. Alright, with that all out of the way, how do you actually win games? Well, I already mentioned your priority should be to ensure that garrisons are built when they are needed. You should at all times be striving to have 8 garrisons down. How you get there is going to depend on a lot of things. If it's safe to drive around a supply truck, then that's a quick and effective way to build garrisons. If you get camped by the Recon and you can't spawn and take the supply truck because you get camped, then try spawning a supply truck somewhere else, or spawn somewhere on the map and just run to the supply drops using your, like parachuted supply drops, and just do that in multiple different locations. Talk to your squad leaders, explain to them that they should be building garrisons because that's going to result in them running less and shooting more. So more garrisons, more fun, basically. Squad leaders can be unresponsive or uncooperative at times, so stick to engaging with the squads that do respond and try and get them to build a garrison somewhere. And then you thank them if they do and rely on them for future instructions. For example, for going on the attack on an Airhead or going back to defend a point that's getting overrun. If you focus on just getting garrisons down and the occasional use of your Recon Plane or the reinforce or bombing run as defensive and offensive tools, then you should be doing fine. Use your garrison placement to make sure that your team always has different options to fall back and defend, and if you start detecting an enemy attack into a sector, then you need to immediately request a specific squad to fall back and defend and rebuild any lost garrisons. There's a lot more of this type of information on my advanced tactics videos and the specific videos I've done for each map, so check those out because I do want to move on to how not to lose, which is basically how not to overcommit on an attack. The main reason that teams lose in Hell Loose is either lack of garrisons to fall back or failure to fall back. That is basically it. Remember that at its core, this game is about having more people in a specific area of the map than your enemy team. That is all there is to it. So garrisons give you the ability to outspawn the enemy, but only if you actually use them. Overcommitting to an attack often happens because your team is somewhere on the map that's not the enemy sectors and it's not your own defensive sector. So let's take a look here at what's happening, and you can see our team is stuck here outside the relevant sectors, which are a battery or chapel. They are just hanging around outside any sector of importance as a way to try and get into chapel. We do have a back garrison. This is a really good attack garrison onto chapel because you spawn already inside the chapel sector, which is very good. While, for example, attacking from this side, there's going to be a significant amount of time where you're outside both the chapel and AA battery sectors. So when you have situations like this, it's even worse actually when for example you have this middle sector and battery, then you would have to go all the way across the map basically to try and get into the sector. And what's going to happen is if your team gets overpopulated, let's say that way, into these sectors that are not in question, that are not relevant, that are not capture sectors for the sectors that are active, then you will lose. Because what the enemy team is going to do, for example here, they dropped an airhead behind us, and now they just spawn here, take out this garrison, flood the point, and it's game over. Because if these squads don't fall back quickly enough into the sector, and they are just caught transitioning towards chapel, for example, we are gonna lose AA battery. Like, that's how teams win. And you gotta remember that you're almost always only like 10 minutes away from absolute defeat. It takes 2 minutes to cap a sector. You can start capping the next sector right away. So for example, in this situation, if they cap AA, they can just go into Terra Green right away and start capping that. That disables the HQ spawn, and suddenly our team has nowhere left to fall back except to spawn here and run towards Terra Green. By that time, the match is basically over. So remember that you're only ever a few minutes away from absolute defeat in this game. Matches can last an hour and a half long, but if you have 4 sectors capped, like if you're 4-1, it takes 2 minutes to cap a sector, then you're 8 minutes away from entirely losing the game if things don't go your way. Basically, if you get overconfident, if your team overcommits and fails to fall back, if the enemy team has been destroying your backline garrisons and you haven't been rebuilding those, then it will only take like a few minutes and you're done, and the entire game is forfeit basically. So remember that, guys, and that's kind of all the advice that I'm gonna give in this video. There's plenty more in my other guides, in my advanced tactics guides and garrison placement guides and stuff like that, which you should check out to complement your knowledge as a commander. Alright guys, if you like this video, then please give it a like, leave down a comment with your tips for commanders that might be new to the game, and as always, thank you for watching, and I hope I will catch you in the next one.